Welcome to the Stop Ruining My Childhood podcast.
A sometimes nostalgic, sometimes cynical look back at pop culture.
Join us as we revisit movies, cartoons, and live-action TV of the 80s and 90s and ask the question...
Does this hold up, or did I just ruin my childhood?
My name is Megan.
And I'm Steve.
Today, we are talking about...
Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman.
The New Adventures of Superman.
Right.
Last time, if you missed it, we talked about Superman 1978. That's the movie starring Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder and Marlon Brando.
Got top billing. So we're on a Superman kick right now.
We are on a Superman kick right now. Our plan after this is to do some Halloween stuff for you. So we'll talk about that at the end of the show. If you haven't joined us before, last week we came back after a little bit of a hiatus, but we do a non-sponsored snack and we talk about some fun facts about that, and we do a review. Then we do a summary of the show and some history and fun facts of whatever we're watching. And then we take a break, but you don't.
That's true.
And then we do a full review and recap, and we talk about reception, and we have a fun segment, What is Steve Willing to Watch?, where we talk about what's coming up next.
Well, that's fun is in the eye of the beholder.
It's my eye, so it's fun for me. That's our and if you have been with us before, last time I made some comments that some people took issue with.
Oh.
And
did you get canceled?
I did not get canceled, no. Okay. It was that I said that I didn't have any friends growing up, and people were like, Megan, I was your friend.
Wow.
But here's what I mean by that. Just here's what I meant.
I'm sorry.
I don't mean so first of all, I have like 20 cousins. Mm-hmm. And one of them at least listens.
Well, they don't count. They're family.
They're family, but they listen. A couple of them listen to the show, and they were like, "What the heck, Megan?" The second thing is just I was kind of a nerd, and it's like when a kid grows taller quicker than their friends, right? That my book knowledge grew faster than like my social emotional growth. So I did have people that I hung out with, but I never fully felt like I had imposter syndrome a little bit. And I felt like I didn't fit in, even though they got along with me. I got along with them. I didn't feel like I had people that I could super confide in. And then my parents thankfully recognized that. And I think a lot of parents push their kids like more to academic stuff. And my parents were like, go have some friends.
Your parents listen to this too. Were they like, where are your friends, Megan?
No, they weren't.
Because I'm not going to buy
No, they weren't. But they were like, you had sleepovers and you had friends over. And I was like, yeah, I just never felt, for a long time I didn't, in middle school especially, and part of high school, I felt kind of alone. But I joined clubs to have like structured activities with people whose company I liked.
Yeah.
Right? But I didn't have like a best friend in those kind of years. I guess that's how I would put it. So now that we've had therapy time.
Yeah, seriously.
Sorry, guys. Yeah. But this show is about our childhoods.
We're not sponsored by Better Health.
No,
you can't just go into that.
Oh my God, we're not. But neither, unfortunately, we're not sponsored by like Omaha Steaks. We're like
we're open. I love steak, so if anybody out there works for Omaha Steaks, please.
We didn't have steak for our snack today. We had
Superman ice cream.
Yeah, so the version we have is superhero ice cream. Describe it for the folks while I bring up my notes about it's history.
Ice cream. The ones we bought is from Perry's.
Yes.
And it's blue and yellow and red ice cream. It's called superhero ice cream. We had it on vacation as well, and I think that was called Superman ice cream, right?
Yeah.
It was like, you know, it was, and I thought that was Perry's as well, but I don't recall. It was another brand, but yeah. So it's fruity in flavor.
Mm-hmm. It's brightly colored. I mean, this is the first
very brightly colored.
So we ate it just before because we've had some issues with like crinkling and stuff.
Yeah.
And ice cream is harder to eat and talk. It's not like Lunchables that we had last time.
Right.
But this is super brightly colored. It's bright. It's Superman colors. It's red, blue, and yellow.
Yes.
And the flavor in particular we had is from Perry's because they don't want to have to license Superman. They call it superhero.
Okay.
Yeah, But the history, so first I want to say this, Perry's was founded in 1918 in Akron, New York, which is about 15 minutes away from where I grew up.
Okay, so Western New York.
Western New York, and we had a couple of field trips to go to the Perry's factory.
Oh, okay.
But what they did to make it more educational was they took us first to a dairy farm.
Yeah, so you could see the milk, and then you could go to the ice cream.
Which makes sense, except that half of Lockport is like a suburb and half of it's rural, and most of the kids in my class, like half of them came from the dairy farms that were going to see.
This is supposed to be a field trip?
Yeah,
it's
they're
just
like, these are my dad's cows. Like, you know.
Stayed home today?
Yeah, but then we got to have some of the Perry's treats, which I think I talked about before when we did creamsicles and strawberry shortcake bars. But It was a really fun trip. The ice cream itself did not originate with Perry's, and let me tell you, Steve, when I did the research for this, the people in Michigan are very adamant that this is a Michigan thing and everybody else is copycats.
Okay. So, superhero ice cream is a Michigan thing?
Yeah, and so here's the deal that I don't... Their lore that they put out on several Michigan websites, including like Michigan travel websites, like they advertise like Michigan specific foods, like Detroit Red and is like a drink there, that a beer company during Prohibition switched over and started making ice cream, and they made this particular flavor inspired by Superman.
Okay.
Now, what's the difficulty with that? Is that Prohibition ended in 1933, and
Superman wasn't out yet.
Out for 5 more years. As we talked
last time, it was 5 more years. It was 38.
So their lore is not correct on that, but I do think that they had a version of this ice cream that then later they renamed because of the colors.
Right. They might have had a blue and yellow and red ice cream. And then they renamed it.
The one that we had from Perry's is bubblegum cherry. I'm going to try not to be sick. Blue raspberry and lemon. The original one in Detroit has this ice cream called Blue Moon, which is colored blue, but it's like a deep vanilla with almond in it.
Okay, so it's different.
But if you think about like black cherry and almond and a little bit of lemon, that to me makes sense.
Yes.
This is the flavor that we had. To me, the cherry part is an abomination.
And this tasted to me like bubblegum and Kool-Aid mixed together.
Yeah. But there are tons of different, like, Stroh's has the Blue Moon. It's called Red Pop, which is a Detroit thing, Michigan thing, and then lemon. We've got United Dairy Farmers, which has cherry vanilla and blue vanilla. I've had a version of this where it was just dyed colors, but it was all vanilla, which to me is a waste. We've got one kind that's Super Kid, blueberry, strawberry, banana. Blue Bunny is the one that's Scooper Hero, but it's just vanilla, vanilla, vanilla. There's one that's all fruit punch. There's one that's black cherry, blue moon, vanilla, blue moon, red pop, lemon. So it's interesting to me that basically, this is something that started in Michigan, but then when it went national, there's Super Rainbow, Scooper Hero, Scooper Man, Tie-Dye Burst, but it's still the same flavors, right? Scooper Powers. Like, there's all these different, like, iterations of it, which I kind of think is neat. I think that's kind of neat. The blue, to me, tastes like black raspberry. Just kind of colored a different color. The lemon, I really liked. There was not a lot of lemon in the one we got, but it was like a lemon meringue. It was like lemon and vanilla mixed.
Yeah.
It was nice. The cherry tastes like toothpaste.
Yeah, and the bubble gum is overpowering.
Strong. And the problem that I had with this is that it's not, as I'm describing it, you might be thinking like Neapolitan. For people who haven't seen it, it's not. It really is like tie-dye, right? It's like all swirled.
Yes.
All the colors are swirled together.
Yeah.
So, I wish that they had just regular cherry or black cherry. I'd love to try the Detroit version.
Yeah.
Vanilla, almond, and cherry or lemon, cherry, and almond.
Here's the other issue, is that, and this is not anything they can control really, but where we live, I'm spoiled with Stewart's ice cream. And this is not Stewart's ice cream.
It's Perry's, yeah.
It is not nearly as creamy or dairy feeling. It's very... there's just something is missing. Stewart's ice cream, okay, this is the thing. When some people make ice cream, they use the lowest grade of milk.
Right.
Stewart's ice cream grade of milk is higher than most people's milk they sell.
Right.
They're very particular with the quality of the milk they use, and that makes a difference.
And just to be clear, you guys, the Stewart's family owns all their dairy farms, and they keep everything local, so they won't go like they're always within a certain radius.
Yeah, it's the Dake family that owns Stewart's, and
It's not the Stewart family?
No, it's not the Stewart's family.
Okay.
It's the Dake family, and basically there's over 450 Stewart's shops. So it's a substantial section of the state that
but my
they
point
cover.
is, it's not like Ben and Jerry's that's in Vermont, but they ship across the country.
Right.
This is all local,
localized.
and because of that too, you and I know their expiration dates are. They make sure that what you're getting is very fresh. I'll put it that
100%. Yeah, it's very fresh.
So at any rate,
we are not sponsored by Stewart's, but we are open to that. If the Dakes are listening or anyone that works for Stewart's, we're more than happy to be sponsored by Stewart's.
Listen, we love Stewart's so much. We're sounding almost like the Michigan Travel Advisory Board because they're like only have the Blue Moon ice cream that is available in Michigan.
Well, Detroit doesn't have a lot. We can give it to them.
Detroit is a legit nice area. I mean, I have friends who live there, and when I go to visit them, I will try the real Superman ice cream next time because this was kind of a disappointment. So we're rating out of capes today. If you haven't been with us before, we do 1 out of 5 for the snack, 1 out of 10 for the movie or TV show. And we try to just do something random that is associated with the show. So out of capes, 5 capes, what do you give superhero
It's a hard 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Only because, like I said, the flavors didn't really hit me good. The colors are neat and interesting, but the flavors and the consistency of the ice cream itself, it's not bad, but it's not anything that would be like...
Yeah, I'm going to give mine...
I'm not going to go back and get more right now.
Right.
And so...
And also, I went to like 6 stores to try to find it, and I'm really mad because it was like almost $6 to buy it. And
you had to buy a whole half gallon. Now we have to eat a half gallon
they didn't have any of the pint.
Superhero ice cream.
Well, my plan is to find some kids and just give it to them. I think for kids this would be fun because the colors are fun, the flavors are more for kids. I think that the Michigan version with like black cherry, lemon, almond, that's a more adult palate, right?
If this was molded into like a superhero mold with a stick in it, it's something that kids would buy off like an ice cream truck. Yeah. That's what it reminds me of.
That's a good point. So I'm going to give it a 3. Really, it's just the cherry. That bubble gum in the cherry just really ruined the whole scoop of ice cream that I had. So...
Yeah! 2.5 capes.
2.5 capes out of 5 for superhero ice cream.
It's mid.
It is. It's the middle. But, my only disappointment is that I have a new meal plan and this was my snack for the day. And I really wish that it wasn't.
Wow.
Because
you win some, you lose some.
It was really disappointing. I'll have to find a better snack for tomorrow. All right, so... Steve, give us an overview of Lois and Clark. What's the show about in general?
So this is what it is. Obviously, Lois and Clark is about Superman, right? It's a Superman story from DC Comics, but it's done a little bit differently here. Because in the early 90s, there was a lot of prevalence of like romantic comedies. They kind of decided to go that route with this a little bit. So it's more focused on Clark Kent and his relationship with Lois as investigative reporters with Superman added in. And so a basic plot line of pretty much all of the episodes is something weird or interesting happens in the opening. And then Clark and Lois are investigating as reporters those weird incidences or burglaries or whatever happens to be happening. And then at some point, one of the members, either Lois or Jimmy or somebody connected to them, gets in trouble, and Superman comes in to save the day.
Right.
Right? But a lot of the actual... It's almost a mystery that's being solved by them, and a lot of that detective mystery work is being done by Lois and Clark Kent, not Superman.
Yeah.
Superman is more like bring the big guns in because someone's in trouble. That's kind of the layout. And so Superman saves the day, and then Lois and Clark get the credit at the end in their story of what happened. They put it in the Daily Planet, and they get the credit.
Yeah, so basically... this is a great jumping off point for our fun facts because I want to just start before I get into like more detail to say like what Steve is describing. I think you did a great job describing it because
this isn't my first rodeo.
That's true. When we watched Superman the movie last week, it really is a different dynamic. There, Clark Kent is the false identity he's putting on. And Superman is kind of the real core identity. Right? And we talked about, like, Clark and Lois in that movie had no chemistry. She has chemistry with Superman, but not with Clark. And he plays a much smaller role. Now, I think in, like, 2 and 3, I kind of barely remember. And I think we might see more of Clark in those, maybe. But for the most part, yeah, I would say... like 90% of Lois and Clark episodes are Lois and Clark.
Yeah.
And 10% is Superman.
Really,
maybe,
they are, yeah.
Maybe 15.
And it's interesting that they went this route because this is a little bit more towards Superman lore, right? But there's a difference here, whereas you have Clark Kent and putting on the guise of Superman.
Yes.
Right? To basically hide his identity and to protect the people he cares about, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very different thing in the DC lore with Batman, who Superman and Batman are like good friends, right? But Batman psychologically is Batman, and Bruce Wayne is a mask he puts on.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Bruce Wayne, he's acting. He's pretending to be a playboy, and that's not who he is. Right? And so
he's a traumatized vigilante.
Right. He is a vigilante, and he pretends to be Bruce Wayne. Whereas Superman really is the other way around.
Yeah.
He's Clark. I mean,
I find that so sad and upsetting. And I feel really bad for Batman. Like, 95% of his day, he has to just fake it and be somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm so sad. So this was developed by Deborah Joy Levine, a showrunner and producer. She also worked on Early Edition, which we haven't watched yet, but I loved that show, where he gets the paper the day before.
Yes.
So he can change history. She also worked on Dawson's Creek. And as Steve said, yeah, this goes into Superman lore, which the comics were written by John Byrne at this point.
Yes.
Where Clark Kent is kind of the real personality and Superman is the disguise. And basically the idea, as Steve pointed out in the summary, that there were a lot of rom-coms at the time, and the executives basically said this was aimed at women, not at comic book fans.
Yeah.
So I think that that's interesting. They wanted to take Superman of the 1950s and 60s and update it for today. So it's not just putting on an outfit and saving the day, but that they looked at more the relationship dynamics, the psychology of like, here's Lois. She's a lady who has got it together, but she's still soft in some ways, and she's looking for a guy. And now she meets this guy who's a superhero, and what does she do? Like, what does that do to her head, right? How Lex Luthor was messed up, and why did he do the things he was doing? How did it affect Clark to try to pretend so that people wouldn't know what he was?
Exactly.
Right? They wanted a kind of a softer version and a slow burn romance between Lois and Clark. So they have kind of a will they, won't they a little bit, but you know that they will. But it kind of builds up to a point. And we watched a couple of those episodes.
And it is done in that early 90s romantic comedy kind of way a little bit.
Yeah.
In the relationship between the two of them. One of the things that was different here, too, is that Dean Cain, and obviously Dean Cain was chosen because as you said, this was directed a little at the ladies, right?
Hello, Dean Cain.
Dean Cain does a good job as Superman. I like him as Superman. He's not my favorite Superman, right? He's not Christopher Reeve.
Okay.
Right? Christopher Reeve screams Superman.
Okay.
That being said, I like Dean Cain's Clark Kent better than Christopher Reeve's.
So this is...
He's not bumbly and, like, crouching in a corner. I just think it's done a little better.
Yeah, I think there's... We can get into it with the episodes, but there's definitely less of a line between Superman and Clark Kent. He really is trying to be himself as much as possible.
Yeah.
Right? But interestingly enough, Dean Cain was not the first person cast.
Really?
They cast Gerard Christopher, and then, or they were about to, and then they found out that he had done a show called Superboy from 1989 to 1992.
Yeah,
Do you remember
Superboy,
that
yeah.
show? Well, they called him back up and they were like, you just finished up Superboy? And he was like, yeah, it's on my resume. And they were like,
Yeah.
well, we just like watched it and you've already done this show. Like, we don't want people to think that this is like a reboot or a sequel in any way. Like, it needs to be its own thing. Then they looked at Kevin Sorbo,
Oh, interesting.
who played Hercules, right?
Yep.
And then they cast Dean Cain, who's afraid of flying. So, what better way to overcome that than to be strung up with wires and
That's
things all
true.
the time? Dean Cain, many people don't necessarily know this, but he's actually part Japanese. And his last name comes from his stepfather who adopted him. His stepdad worked in the movie industry, but like behind the camera. He was a football player, and he also, now he's a Christian, but before he had an interview about when he dated Brooke Shields that got a little...
Heated?
Yeah.
Graphic?
And she took issue with it and he apologized. And now he does mostly faith-based films, but he actually wasn't going to be an actor. He played football and he was signed with Buffalo.
Oh, nice.
To be a Buffalo Bill. And while training before the season, just before his first training camp, he had a career-ending injury. And then he decided from there, people were, he had ties to the movie industry, and so then he kind of decided to go that direction, which I think is interesting. Teri Hatcher did James Bond.
Yes.
After this?
I think so. Yeah, I think after this.
And then Desperate Housewives. She is an interesting, I don't know why this came up in their bios, because it doesn't always, but ethnically she's Welsh, French, German, Native American, and Syrian.
Interesting.
And I will say, too, we talked before about, like, the curse of Superman. But both of these actors have gone on to have amazing careers.
Yeah, they both did well. And Teri Hatcher, I mean, first off, all that ethnicity is mixed together real well. Because Teri Hatcher, hello nurse.
That's how I feel about Dean Cain.
And I will say this, Teri Hatcher is my, by far, favorite representation of Lois Lane ever done.
I kind of agree with you on that. Yeah, I think that she's a perfect fit for this role.
Yeah.
Teri Hatcher's first acting role was on a show we still haven't covered, but we've talked about a number of times, and that is The Love Boat.
Of course.
She was on 19 episodes as
she would have been young.
The mermaid?
Okay, yeah, she was probably young.
But I don't know enough about Love Boat to know if that's an actual mermaid or if that's like...
It was in 19 episodes? That's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, from 85 to 86. But I'm thinking maybe she was on the boat as entertainment because
that would make sense.
She can sing and stuff. So I think it's the mermaid, but like sometimes on cruise ships they have like, you'll be dressed up like a mermaid and singing.
Well, if we ever do The Love Boat, we're going to have to dig into that.
I guess. And both of them later on did guest appearances on Smallville, which I think is fun.
Yes, they did.
The other thing I want to say that came up while we were watching it, but that the look of the show, like I said, they really wanted it to look 90s.
Yes.
Which at that point would be contemporary. And they had a softer light to make it look more naturalistic. But they also had, he didn't want just jelly bean colors. And he also didn't want the color palette of the movie, which we talked about before, was very gray.
Yes.
And then just the superhero outfit, right? So he went with a contemporary color palette, which is essentially cranberry, gold, a tan that's a later version of that gold.
Country blue.
Country blue.
It's 90s all over the place.
Country blue, teal, silver that's like a very lighter version of the country blue.
Yeah.
And it looks like a pillow that my mom had on our couch.
Oh, yeah, I see this, and I'm like, oh, that's how my mom painted our house in the 90s.
Here's the thing, that I understand that, but it was all the clothes, all the background colors, and every set. And I will say that they, from the first episode to we watched one in season 1 and one in season 3. I'm glad we did, because they changed it up a tiny bit for season 3.
Yeah.
Because before that, it was almost monotone, because you could, Lex Luthor's lair didn't look any different than, the Daily Planet or Lois's apartment. They looked very much
Yeah, they looked very similar.
But it's such a, looking at it, you immediately yep, that's 1993.
100%. And Dean Cain with all the, funky ties.
Yes.
Is Clark Kent. Clark Kent always has, a weird, funky's 90s tie.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, we get it.
And the last thing I want to say here is, too, that they really retooled things after season 1. So season 1, we have the main cast is Lois, Clark, Perry, the guy who runs the Daily Planet, Jimmy Olsen, Lex Luthor, Lucy, Lois's sister, who Jimmy's kind of interested in, and Kat, who does the
gossip.
Yeah, the gossip column.
Gossip column,
yeah. And they get rid of Kat.
Yep.
They kind of get rid of Lex Luthor. I think, does he come back later a couple times?
Yeah,
but
he still pops in.
They kind of replaced him with other villains.
Bad guys, yep.
And they replaced Jimmy Olsen. And the reason that they replaced Jimmy Olsen is because the actor, they felt was a little too old for the part and looked a lot like Dean Cain.
Okay.
In terms of they both have black hair, they're about he's about the same height.
So they wanted somebody that definitely distinguished themselves.
And somebody who definitely looked a little bit younger. And once they did that, the person that they then hired had better chemistry with the guy who played Perry.
Yes.
And so that they could kind of team them up a little bit more and give them a little more screen time. Oh, we also have Clark's mom and dad.
That's true,
and
yeah.
A little fun fact is that I forget the woman's name who played his mom, but she went in for the audition and she was wearing cute mom clothes, I would say, the kind of stuff my mom would wear, jeans and a little hoodie and whatever. And all of the other women were dressed up in farm clothes, because Martha and Jonathan, of course, they live in
on a farm in Kansas,
in Smallville. But she kind of had the idea from her agent that they were looking for a 90s version, Martha,
gotcha.
They live on a farm, but they can drive to the suburb, they can drive to Metropolis, right? All of that. So I thought that was kind of a cute little detail.
Yeah. And they do dress her that way throughout this. She's not dressed like farmer. She's dressed like
she's dressed like a middle-aged older lady.
And Jonathan Kent is also, he's usually in jeans and maybe a flannel shirt.
Yeah.
He's not in overalls with a piece of wheat sticking out of his mouth, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't look like the painting.
No. It's the American Gothic
painting, right? No, they did go with a little bit of a more updated version. And so that was an interesting part of that also. One of the other concerns they had here was that this is one of the shows, this went 4 seasons, 87 episodes. And this is one of the shows that they thought got hit by the moonlighting curse.
Well, that is a thing, yeah.
Right. And those of you who don't know, the moonlighting curse is in the show Moonlighting, which was a huge hit, right, with Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis. The show was phenomenal and going really well till they put them together.
Yeah.
And once Dave and Maddie got together, the show slumped. And then it ended up being canceled. They felt this happened here too. They put Lois and Clark together in the 3rd season, and in the 4th season, it didn't do as well, and they ended up canceling it after that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little in our memories, but I will say that we covered Cheers, our 2nd episode. I do think Shelley Long ended up leaving that show. I think if she hadn't, they probably would have gone the same way. Yeah. Because it was very much the same thing with Sam and Diane, that the romantic tension was kind of what was pulling it along.
Yes.
Yeah, with the cancellation, they actually canceled season 5 without telling the cast or crew. Like, at all.
Wow.
And typically, if you're on a show like that, especially one that when it started, it was, we'll talk about this in reception, but I can fairly remember that it was pretty good in the ratings.
Yeah.
So they had to pay Warner Brothers a lot of money.
Oh, I bet.
Because in season 3 is basically, so we watched the first episode of season 3.
Yep.
And they basically fully get them together in season 3.
Yes.
But the ratings shot up because season 2 ends with a cliffhanger.
Yes.
And it gets pulled into season 3. So season 3, the first couple episodes, the ratings are huge. They sign with Warner Brothers for a 2-year deal. And then after the first year of that for season 4, they cancel season 5.
So they were on the hook for half of it.
They were, yep. So they had to pay out for not having that.
4 seasons and 87 episodes is still a pretty successful run.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned earlier the fact that Dean Cain wasn't the first choice. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when he auditioned, Levine actually did not like him because she thought he was too young for the role.
Interesting.
And it was reported that after he walked out of his audition, she snapped at the casting director and said, "We're casting for Superman, not Superboy."
Which is funny because they almost cast Superboy.
Yeah.
And he, as I said too, he was afraid of flying. But they put him on a harness with wires, and then they erased the wires in post-production. And anybody he was carrying was put on a separate wire, which is a lot different from how they did it with Christopher Reeve, where they had him on a pole.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of interesting to me too, how like by that time we get a little bit too of some early CG effects, which I think are kind of neat. And there's one other effect in the episode that we'll talk about when we get to that point. But we're going to take our break here. You won't. But when we come back, we will get into our memories and then our full review and recap. All right, we're back. I'm Megan.
And I'm Steve.
Still.
Hasn't changed.
After that 10-second of music
that
you just heard. We used to have ads in there and we were thinking about doing a Patreon, but now that we're kind of doing every other week, I didn't think that we should keep that up. So just a little music break for you guys and for us to walk around, stretch our legs, finish our snack, all that kind of thing.
Think of memories.
Yeah. So Steve, what is your memory of this show?
So I do remember this show quite well. I watched it when it came out. It came out in 93, so I would have been in high school while this was out. And so I do remember watching it quite a bit. I've always been a comic fan, and I was a comic book collector, especially during these years. So even though, as we mentioned before, it was kind of shot as more of a romantic comedy, it still had enough Superman in it, I think, to attract comic fans.
Yeah.
Right? And so I really enjoyed it. I liked it. And it was one of those things that I just remember being a big part of my high school years, like being one of the shows that I had to watch. This, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right? Things of that nature that were all in that era. And yeah, I do remember it. It's funny because I don't remember, we talked about the 90s look. Right, and of course, when you're in the 90s, you don't think about that, right?
Yeah.
And the producers said that they had designed it to be a timeless look. Yeah. And it's hilarious because we're like, that's the 90s, right?
The producers of the Brady Bunch said that too.
Yeah, but now you look back and you're like, that's definitely a certain look.
That's 1960s. Yeah.
But yeah, so it was always a fun memory for me because I'm a big comic book fan, Superman being one of those characters. And like I said, I mean, when you're a teenage boy and Teri Hatcher is Lois, oh boy. And they had a few, it's all appropriate for TV. But there's a few times that Lois is in some, like a nightie or a towel, and you're like, that's what I'm talking about, Teri Hatcher.
They have Dean Cain shirtless a number of times.
Yeah, that didn't do anything for me.
I know, but my point is that they're trying to hit all of the demographics here. And definitely for me, this was like appointment television. So I had a friend who I had a crush on and I thought he didn't know, but looking back, he definitely did. It was just like, no.
Sad life.
So sad. But at least I had a friend by that point, I guess.
That's true.
We talked about that earlier. So this show and the X-Files we would watch and then talk about it on the phone, or sometimes we would be on the phone while it was on and we would talk on the phone while we watched it.
You did like a simulcast, but in the 90s.
Yeah, but in the 90s. And it's not like we had multiple phone lines.
You had a viewing party. So your parents can't get on the phone while Lois and Clark because the X-Files are on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I remember, too, is that a lot of times, this is a show our whole family liked, though. So sometimes I would just watch it, like, with my parents and my brother. Because
and the phone?
No,
okay.
That was, like, separate days, I guess. Now that I'm thinking of it, yeah, I didn't know that guy the first year. So that had to be the second year it was out. I also very distinctly remember that right around the time the ratings dipped, they gave her a haircut. And I know that this sounds stupid, but this happened with Felicity, too. Like, the lead has a certain look.
Yes.
And the haircut they gave her, like, it didn't look like Lois Lane anymore. It was like a short... Do you know what I'm talking about? It was like short and, like, big curls. It was very odd and distinctive, but... I did think that had a little bit to do with it. So, yeah, the fourth season of this I did not watch. Like many people, because they got Lois and Clark together. And also, it was my senior year of high school. And by that time, I did have a lot more friends. And I just I wouldn't have had time. I wasn't really home as much. And I think, too, because it had 87 episodes, I never happened to catch this in syndication. A lot of times, syndication requires 100. Did you ever see this, like, in reruns?
Yeah, but this is why. This entire all 4 seasons aired on TNT.
Oh, okay.
So TNT had a deal of rights, and TNT has shown it in reruns.
Interesting. Yeah, and for a while, like once we did get cable, I don't think that was part of, like, we had like very basic cable for a bit,
Gotcha.
And then we expanded. But even so, like. Yeah, that sometimes happens. Like TNT gets something or USA or whatever. I also think around the time that this would have been in reruns, shows were starting to come out early 2000s that had longer arcs. Mm-hmm. And for me, just storytelling wise, I think that's kind of more interesting.
Yeah. And there was some ongoing arcs in this, but it was definitely episodic. It was definitely done where each episode they have a different case or a different story they're chasing or a different bad guy.
Yeah. So let's get into the first episode. The pilot of Lois and Clark, episode 1, season 1. The opening shots of this are interesting to me because we open in the Daily Planet.
Yeah.
And Lois has a costume on. And if you don't know it's Teri Hatcher, it's not a bad costume.
That's true.
She's got like a mustache and she pulls it off, and she's been undercover with a guy as a man.
Right.
Rather, not with a man, but as a man. And we see her having some repartee with Jimmy and with Perry, and she's trying to get an interview with Lex. But it's interesting that we open with her. This is Lois and Clark, not Clark and Lois, right? It's aimed at women. So we have... as all romantic comedies are, like the girl in the big city who has an important job, but it's still creative.
Yes.
Which I think is kind of funny.
They also dress her masculine.
Yeah, more masculine.
Even when she's not dressed, like she's dressed as a guy when she first opens up. But her normal clothes, they're women's clothes, but they're more business. They're more pantsuit kind of, set.
It's very, except. I don't want to be mean. She looks better in them. But it is a little bit like Hillary Clinton kind of like at that time. Like pantsuits, sometimes a skirt, but usually pants, oversized blazers, like that kind of thing.
Although I guess in the 90s this was kind of a thing too. Like when you think 90210, girls were wearing vests a little bit. Like over t-shirts and things like that.
Steve, I had like a thing, like I wanted to dress like a reporter in this show, and there was a movie called The Paper, and I did like start wearing vests all the time.
With a hat with a little ticket in it that said press?
No.
Because that would be hilarious.
No, it wasn't quite that bad, but like if you know me, I'm like dress a lot more like girly girl. I usually wear dresses and stuff, and I completely switched over, and I was like, I'm like an 8, wear khakis and a vest and a button down blouse.
Like I gotta make the early edition, see?
Well, I wanted to go. This show is one of the things that I really wanted to go into journalism for a while. And then as I was getting into college, I kind of saw how the internet was changing journalism, and I didn't like it. I didn't want to be part of that kind of journalism.
People are like, who are your journalistic icons? And you're like, Lois Lane. And they're like, it's not what we meant, but okay.
Yeah. So then we see Clark, and again, a really subtle detail here, and we're going to kind of put things in larger chunks in a minute, because this was like a 2-hour pilot.
Yeah, it's a part 1 and part 2.
It's like a movie. But a really subtle detail to focus in on the fact that this is Clark. That's his main identity. Before you see him, he gets off the bus. You just see his legs and his feet. Gets off the bus, sets down his luggage, and there's a CK imprinted on his luggage.
Yeah, and it's an old beat-up luggage.
Totally different than the movie that starts with the planet Krypton, and then sending him to Earth, and then him lifting a car at 3,
This
right?
starts with him arriving in Metropolis.
Yes.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't miss anything.
Yeah,
Remember, one of the criticisms about the Superman movie in 78 was that it spent way too much time before we get to Metropolis.
Yeah, so he, it's his primary identity as Clark. Yes, you're right. We didn't miss anything.
Because we get filled in later on Superman.
And also, it's showing instead of telling, right? There's a run. But my favorite part of the episode happens here. Because I'm going to try. I don't want to laugh through the whole podcast. There's a runaway bus. He looks at the bus. He looks at where the bus is heading. And in the most stereotypical manner are 3 nuns and a woman with a baby carriage. And it's just like they wanted something that would really show you the peril.
Yeah. We're
not going to get that if it's just some dude walking across the street.
Yeah, heck with him. Let him get hit.
It's an older lady with her groceries, 3 nuns, and a woman with a baby carriage, like an old-fashioned baby carriage.
A blind man. No.
That would have been funny, though. They added that in.
Like preschool class walking hand in hand.
Yeah. So he stops the bus. He leaves a handprint. The older woman sees this happening, and she's like, that man, and he like runs away into the crowd, right? So immediately he's peril because he doesn't want people to know he has these abilities.
Yes.
But it's a really cool effect on the bus. It's a nice way to show the abilities without, like, we don't need the info dump backstory, like you were just saying, you know? We also have, I think, some editing here that it's flipping between Lois and Clark.
Yes.
And then eventually getting them together, and then we follow the 2 of them.
Yep.
So, again, a little bit more contemporary in terms of quicker edits and not just like, one long story.
And the show does a good job in the fact that, I mean, it is a Superman story, right? But at the same time, it's not just about Superman. It's about both of them.
Yeah.
And so it tries to split the time amongst... There are times where it's not like traditionally where you have Superman and then Lois is in scenes with him.
Right.
There are a number of scenes where Lois is the focus and Dean Cain's not even in the scene.
Yeah. We have her back at the Daily Planet. There's a man who comes in whose name is Platt. He's dressed almost like he's displaced person. Like maybe he's homeless. He seems like he might be mentally ill. He's shouting and yelling at her about this spaceship that's supposed to go... Spaceship. There's a rocket that's supposed to be launched and it's in trouble and blah, blah, blah. That's the story that's going to kind of pull us through this episode.
Right.
So what's happening with the rocket? What's the problem? Who's causing the problem? How are Lois and Clark separately or maybe together going to be involved? And then how is Superman going to kind of help the situation?
Right.
And so But the first piece I thought it did a good job in the pilot. How did you think it did of like introducing like how Clark gets into the paper and like how they introduce their families and stuff?
Yeah, so Clark, of course, because he can fly, has been at no expense to himself, flying around the world basically and doing like a la carte reporting. Right, where he's like freelance. Right.
Yes.
He'll go to like Burma, or I'll go to Thailand, and he'll do a story on the locals. Right, and so he's been doing this, and then returning to Smallville with his parents, and now he's decided like he still hasn't found a place he fits in. So he's decided to apply for a reporting job at the Daily Planet in Metropolis,
and gets turned down. At first,
yeah.
And then there's basically a setup where there's a story Lois isn't interested in. It's this theater that's being closed to make a parking lot.
Yeah.
Which is very 90s. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot, right? He uses his heat vision to break the construction equipment. He uses his x-ray vision to see inside the theater. And then he goes and talks to this woman and then writes. They just do a clip of it, but you can tell that he's supposed to be a very good writer.
Yes.
Which I liked because we didn't see that in the movie version either. So
all they said was he was a fast typer.
Right, yeah. Well, and he does obviously types so fast at home that he makes his keyboard start smoking.
In 78, they're like, he's such a fast typer without a secretary to do it for him.
That's so accurate.
In the 90s, they're like, yeah, he took keyboarding.
Yeah, exactly. But they do have a cute little thing where he types so quickly that his laptop starts smoking, which I thought was funny. But he has this thing of like, Warren G. Harding was president. Babe Ruth was just sold to the Yankees. And this was Beatrice's first day on stage. And now she's returning to a place that will soon only be memories. Like, it's really...
He's writing like a novel, not like a cheap, like...
Yeah,
like...
but it's very poignant. And you could see it be a human interest piece, right? It's also like, it's just, for me, this is the nostalgic piece of it. That first, the newsroom does seem more like a newsroom for a medium-sized city. It's not the New York newsroom that we saw in the film.
Right.
But also, this is the way that reporting was done, that you would go and you would investigate and you would track people down and you'd talk to them. And it wasn't just like, so-and-so had a celebrity feud on Twitter or repeating like...
It's not that you just repeat what you read somewhere else.
Yes. And this is why I didn't go into journalism, because I saw this kind of happening already, that it's just not, it isn't what it used to be. And I do think that's kind of dangerous, to be honest, because then
it's not an art anymore.
It's not an art, but it's also, you're getting things that like the corporations have said or the politicians have said rather than like investigation.
Right.
And now it's being written by AI. So that's even worse. Anyway, moving along, the other people in the office, Jimmy, I kind of liked this Jimmy. I don't like him as much as the other Jimmy.
Yeah, but the Jimmy they replace him with does a little bit better job.
But then we have Kat, who, by the way, you guys, 100% is sexually harassing Clark.
Oh, 100% she's sexually harassing Clark. She's constantly touching him and kissing him and sitting on his lap, and he's not asking for it.
No.
And she's supposed to be like a vixen.
Yeah.
Like, and they talk about how she's like basically hooked up with most of the guys in the newsroom.
Yeah, they say, Lois goes, she just wants another notch on her garter belt.
Yeah.
What?
Okay, Lois.
And then Jimmy goes, what color is that garter belt? Which it's funny. But yeah, Kat is also, her dress and her makeup are way louder than everybody else's. So
she's dressing like Ginger from Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
Right? But the thing is too, like when they decided, you said they made some show changes between season 1 and season 2. And I almost felt like Kat going was an HR thing.
Yes.
Because she really...
They should have had that be an HR thing, honestly. But, this is like just when sexual harassment was starting to be talked about, you know? So, and especially a woman doing it to a man. But it is like Horrible Bosses with Jennifer Aniston's role, right? Like, she's like... She's pretty up there.
And as I mentioned to you, they bring her back because 20 years later in Supergirl, the show, Kat Grant is Supergirl's boss.
Played by a different actress, obviously.
Different actress, but it's the same character.
Yeah, but maybe not as, like,
well, she's grown up a bit. It's 20 years later.
That's true. My here was that they show that Clark is really trying to be the kind of person where, like, this is your first real job in your 20s.
Yes.
He's got a really crappy apartment that looks like a jail cell. They do a great special effect where he walks on the walls to fix a light bulb. He floats up on the walls. And they did that.
He flies to paint the whole thing super fast.
Yeah. They did that with a rotating room, which is an effect they used in a Fred Astaire movie where he danced up the wall. So I thought that that was kind of a fun little effect. He also, we see Lois's sister, who's, like, very bland, and I'm not surprised they cut her. But we also see Martha and Jonathan because he flies back. Yeah.
He also calls home a lot.
Yeah, on a payphone.
And chats with them on the phone.
There are things I miss from the 90s and things I don't.
Yeah.
The payphone is like, oh, I'm so glad we don't have to do that anymore. Yeah, he calls them on a payphone a couple of times. So he gets the job, right? And they have this thing where they're trying to kind of investigate what's going on with this guy that left stuff for Lois.
Yeah.
Dr. Platt.
Perry basically says, this is great writing. You're a good writer. He gives him a job, and then basically is like, Lois, he's going to be partners with you. And Lois is like, I don't need a partner. I don't want this guy that Kat's getting handsy with all over, like, in my way.
Well, but part of it, you can tell, is that she's attracted to him a little bit.
There's a little bit of chemistry.
And she tells him later, much later, that she has rules that she never breaks. She doesn't get involved with a story, and she doesn't sleep with people she works with. Yeah. And then she admits, when they're tied up and in peril, that at one point she did sleep with somebody, and he goes, it wasn't Jimmy, was it? Which I think is a hilarious joke. But that she did sleep with someone who was this guy from France, and he was very charismatic, and he stole her story and left. And then ended up winning an award for it.
As you do.
So I think that she's, yes, you do. So I think she's kind of like, hey, there's another cute guy who I'm attracted to. I have to be protective of myself.
She's had her heart broken, man.
I know, and they show her watching soap operas so that you know that she's not just a hard as nails lady, that she has a soft heart. Yes. And she's looking for love, but she's been hurt before.
That's true.
And that's sweet. I liked it.
Is it this episode where they spread a rumor or something that Kat says, like, she'd, like, spent the night with him?
No, that's a couple episodes later.
Okay. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I will say this too: out of all of the Superman and Loises that have been portrayed, and there's a lot of them, probably close to 10 sets of people, right? I think these two, Dean Cain and Teri Hatcher, I think these two have the most chemistry. Yeah. Out of any other Lois Lane in Superman.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's really fun when they get paired up to do this reporting. So first they go to this, she kind of asks him, and he's like, is this a date? And he smirks at her, and she's like, no, it's not a date. Yeah. But they go to, like, this ball
it's like party. It's like a gala.
Yeah, it's a gala that Lex Luthor is throwing because, of course, he's the wealthy man about town that her sister wants her to date.
Yeah, because he's rich, and and I mean, the guy they choose is relatively handsome, I guess you could, like, he's not, He
looks...
he's not bald.
No, but I don't... Okay, I want to say this. I didn't look it up, and I should. He looks like Ted Bundy a little. He looks... I don't know if he played Ted Bundy in a movie, but I think he might have.
Okay.
What I mean by that is he's a tall, lanky guy with very curly, like, sandy brown hair. Yep. And I swear I saw him in a movie where he played Ted Bundy.
I mean, or something similar. I mean, he's...
But, yeah, so at any rate, they go to this gala, and he unveils this plan for a second space station that... Basically, this is a show, Steve, because now we have a bunch of billionaires who want to go to space.
Right. It's ahead of its time.
Yeah, and so there's a space mission currently going on where they're sending colonists to the moon. Yes. Or to a space station.
To a space station, yep.
And he's got another plan for a private one that's not, like, government run, basically. And he unveils this, again, some cool 90s tech. special
like hologram
effects.
kind of
yeah,
thing.
the hologram that comes down and that kind of thing. But
this is where you start to see, okay, Lex has an interest here. This is a competitor of his.
Yes.
So this is where the conflict is going to come in.
Yeah, and I mean, we know he's nefarious, right?
Yes.
But it's just a matter of, like, them revealing what that nefariousness and, kind of evil genius is going to look like. They also have, here's my highlight from this section. I don't remember if it's before or after the party, but a snake comes into his room, and like Nagini and Harry Potter, which it would be much, this is before that, the snake slithers in, and you think it's going to kill him, and he, like, tames it, and then the snake goes back to the handler, like he's training himself. Then the
handler comes in, he's like, thank you.
Yeah, he's training himself for, like, assassination attempts. I don't know.
His second, like, his henchman is, like, very exotic. Mm-hmm. And it almost reminds me of, like, of who was Daddy Warbucks' like second.
Yeah, it is supposed to be like that. It's like Punjab.
It's
from,
like Punjab,
from Annie.
And I was like, this is very stereotypical.
Which is what's interesting to me about that is that I mentioned this last time that really everybody in the movie Superman was white. It is more diverse, but then it's racist. It's a little racist, this part. Or at the very least, very stereotypical, right? That we have this. But that was my highlight of that piece. Then they go, as a team, they're going to talk to Dr. Platt because they've had a problem with the first test launch.
Yes.
Goes awry. Throughout this, there's a blonde woman who's running the space program. We find out later she's involved with Lex. Yeah. So basically, Lex is not really interested in Lois. He's just toying with her.
Right.
That's kind of an important piece. But they go to talk to Dr. Platt, and he's dead.
Yes.
And he's electrocuted, and the police are like, suicide. What?
Sometimes
this is why you need Superman,
Megan,
Steve.
you just decide to end it with electrocution.
That's not typical. I mean,
I would be more to say, like, accidental death. Like,
I know, right? I mean, it's a very odd, like, and you can't, to me, I'm just like, do they really need Superman that badly because they're dumb, or are they being paid off by people? I don't know. But we found out before that Dr. Platt has a widow and a young daughter, and the two of them are still on the plans to go into space, to be colonists. And this is just like the nuns in the baby carriage. The daughter's in a wheelchair. Yeah. Like, it's not sad enough that her dad
They're going to find a cure to her condition in space.
Yeah, she can walk in space.
Yeah.
And she says to Superman at one point, can you teach me how to fly? He goes, nope, but maybe you'll be able to walk. Well, there's no gravity, Superman. So she could fly if she wanted. It'd be probably easier for her to fly. But, and that's the actress's only credit, the girl who played that role. I don't know if she knew somebody in production or something.
Once you're in Lois and Clark, that's the pinnacle. It's only downhill from there.
That's true. It's such a good show. So, we have a couple times Lois is in peril. He comes to save her, but he doesn't want to say that it's him. And the blonde woman from the space program's holding them up at gunpoint. She ties both of them up. And he's able to, while Lois is talking about Claude and how her heart was broken, he's able to get out of the restraints and pretend like they were broken. Right. Then the launch is set, and okay, this is my low light of the episode. Lois sneaks onto the ship that's taking the colonists.
Well, we've seen before she's a master of disguise.
Steve, how was she going to get home?
Megan, story first. She can't think about little details like getting back from the space station.
Listen, she's going to write a book about the space station because she's going to be there for like 7 years or however long. I mean, they're colonizing it. They also, I want to say this, if you have a mission like that, you're rationing out all the food and stuff. Now you have this adult woman who before told us she was 26, even though she looks like she's 35 based on how she dresses. But you have a 26-year-old woman you got to feed.
Lois is petite. She doesn't eat a lot. It's fine.
That's true.
Well, you're getting too deep into this.
No, I'm thinking about how much food I would probably take. But you're right. She's like a size 00. So the space station Prometheus. This is definitely like the Challenger.
Yeah.
I mean, they film it to look like it could be that kind of a disaster. Mm-hmm. The Challenger was only in 86. This is 93. It's not like it's that far away. Mm-hmm. But it was definitely the explosion of the Challenger that happened. A lot of people were watching because there were teachers on board. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't colonists exactly, but it was supposed to be like the first like civilians to go into space. And so Lois sees the bomb.
Yeah, Lois gets onto the rocket and realizes there's a bomb on board.
And this is my other favorite part of this episode. That Superman flies in and he's going to save the day. Mm-hmm. And he goes to the bomb and he rips it apart. She's like, what are you doing? Are you a crazy person? And you think he's going to fly back out with it, launch it into space. And instead,
he eats it. Yeah. Well, he's the Man of Steel, Megan.
I can't.
Better have it blow up inside him than inside the ship.
Here's why I loved this. Because it was such a funny detail and it was definitely not expected. They definitely did that to play against expectations. And maybe not. Maybe they wanted him launching it into space and the production team was like, we don't have the money for that shot. Right?
Yep.
And so they had to come up with something else. But it was brilliant. I hope that it was in the script from the beginning. Because it really, to me, kind of sells the show. So he eats it. Then they go out and they're like, well, you saved the day, but at the same time, we lost our window. The thrusters are gone.
Yeah, and if we don't go, we can't go now because we have no thrusters.
And he goes, there's nothing wrong with this vehicle, you dumb idiots. I can fly it up into space. And he flies out, pushes it up into space, and then of course all of the papers and all over the news, it's the flying man and whatever. And in the newsroom, everybody's talking about it and they're having a big party. Oh, hooray, they finally launched it, blah blah blah. And everybody's talking about who is this winged man, and he comes in carrying Lois.
Yep, he flies through the double doors.
Yeah,
with her cradled in his arms.
Yeah, and sets her gently, delicately down. And then Kat says, well, this is something I thought I'd never see. And Jimmy goes, a flying man? And she goes, no, Lois Lane swept off her feet. Because Kat actually gets it, and she has kind of a good heart in the end.
Also, Kat's a little irritated because she's been throwing it at Clark all episode, and he keeps kind of giving her the wave.
Yeah,
off.
And where is Clark this whole time? Kat's like, where's my man? Listen, he took off his glasses.
Yeah, they don't know that it's him.
We skipped that part that they have a whole montage back in Kansas just before this piece
where his mom making the costume.
And what does she say to Steve? She goes, they don't call him tights for nothing. And he goes, Mom! And she goes, I'm just saying nobody will be looking at your face. What? Gross.
Inappropriate.
Gross and
inappropriate, Martha Kent.
But I did like that little piece of it, too, of him with his mom and trying on different outfits. And then she says, and Jonathan, they're very worried that his identity will be revealed.
Yeah.
That's why they wanted to make him the costume. And they're like, should we have a mask? How will people not know it's you? And he goes, nobody will know it's me. And he rips off his glasses. And they look at him like, that's a dumb thing to say, Clark. And they just go, okay. And they turn back to the TV. And that's when we see.
They've been dealing with Clark for a long time.
That's true.
So they're like, oh, Clark, yeah, you're right, honey.
Sure, sweetie.
Sure, fine. They'll never know.
Bless your little heart. That's the look that they give him. Anyway, that's when he sees on TV that the thing's in peril. Yeah. Sorry to be out of order there, guys. But yeah, so at the end of the episode, after he's dropped Lois off, she asks for an interview and he says, okay, but then he flies off. He goes into Lex Luthor's apartment.
And he's like, Lex, I know you're up to no good and I don't like it.
Yeah.
And Lex is like, prove it.
And he's like, he goes, well, why don't you do something to me? And Superman's like, because I actually follow the laws of this country. Unlike you, you're responsible for at least 3 deaths that I know of. Because he bumped off the lady that he was banging who was in charge of the space program. He killed Dr. Platt.
Yep.
And I forget who the third one was. But it's another person connected with that program. And so he goes, you're at least, and I bet there's more skeletons in your closet. And he goes, you wanted to set up your own space station and have you save the whole space program and save billions of dollars coming in. Now, my only point with this is that knowing bureaucracy, if there's a big blow up of a spaceship, ain't nobody going nowhere for a long time because there's going to be paperwork and investigations and they're not going, but again, Lex Luthor's plan in the movie was to blow up the San Andreas Fault and cause earthquakes. So comparatively, but it's just kind of funny that we have the piece of telling the henchmen. So the setup of Clark coming to the big city, getting a job at the Daily Planet, meeting Lois, starting to establish a relationship. We see her family. We see his family. He becomes Superman in the uniform.
Helps to save the day.
Helps to save the day and establishes his nemesis. For a pilot, I think this was pretty good.
Yeah.
I will say, I think it probably could have been an hour and a half. And I think that they stretched it out a bit. There were some scenes that dragged a tiny bit for me, but they didn't do too much info dumping. They had a good balance. They had great chemistry of everything. And yeah, for opening the show, I thought it was amazing. So Steve, we're at about the hour point right now, and I don't think we need to go like point by point of the other episodes.
No, but we did get a chance to see. We wanted to see another episode that was important, right?
Yeah.
And not that all of them are not, but as we mentioned before, they're episodic. Part of that is because also when the producers and the writers for this were doing this, there's a number of plot lines that either mirror or almost exactly plot lines from the George Reeves Superman show.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
which was episodic
I didn't realize
as well.
That. Yeah.
Right.
So, what we basically did was we had What Is Steve Willing to Watch last time, and he was willing to watch the first episode of season 3, but we actually watched both. It was
a cliffhanger.
Yeah. So we went back and watched the last episode of season 2, which actually touched on an episode that had happened earlier in the season.
Yep.
And then we watched the first episode of season 3. So to give you guys kind of a rundown, basically in the middle of season 2, they have this episode where H.G. Wells is on his time machine.
Yes.
And he is traveling through time, and there's this guy who has nefarious plans. He writes down in a diary all this stuff about Lois and Clark, and then is taken back to the 1800s and put in jail. We don't see that episode, but that's basically what happens.
Right. One of his descendants gets a hold of the diary, which basically says Clark Kent is Superman.
Right. And that's at the end of season 2.
Right. And so in that end of season 2 episode, he basically is blackmailing Clark to go steal diamonds and do all this other stuff for him, or he's going to tell everyone he's Superman.
Yeah, and we have a little bit of a difference by this point. Lois and Clark have been dating a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's strong flirtation and kind of dating.
Strong flirtation, they're definitely together, and there's some nice changes. He is wearing a lot more black. Well, partially because he breaks in and steals diamonds.
Yeah.
But he wears more black and stronger colors.
They've softened her look a bit.
They softened her look. He doesn't always have a dorky tie on.
True.
Sometimes, but not always. Yeah, she's wearing more like skirts. And not like pencil skirts, but like A-line, like a little more flowy kind of skirts. So yeah, they soften they soften her up and they strengthen him up.
That's what you do when you're in love.
Yeah. You wear pretty skirts for the guys that you like.
So basically, he's able to figure that out, and this guy basically he's like, I'm not going to do it. I don't care. And so the guy kidnaps
his parents first. Yeah,
and that's when Lois gets involved because he doesn't tell Lois he's Superman, but he says they kidnapped my parents. And so she kind of is involved in helping him get his parents back, which he does.
But then they kidnap her. Or they want her dead.
Yeah, they want to kill her.
They don't know that Superman or that Clark and Lois are together.
Right.
So she says to him, you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to do it. And he goes, well, she goes, wait, let's call Superman. And then she has this idea. Superman comes in. Clark's not there.
Yep.
And she says, tell Clark I love him. And he touches her face and he says, he knows.
Yeah.
And
now
then he freezes her.
And yeah, her idea is that he can use his cold breath to freeze her and basically cryogenically freeze her. And then be able to bring her back later.
Which is not how that happens.
It's the 90s. Cryogenics is a bit... No.
Yeah, that's true. The idea is kind of like... Yeah, but at any rate...
He can later bring back Lois and Walt Disney's head.
That's...
Okay.
Yeah, so he freezes her to enact this plan. Essentially, he saves the day again.
Yep.
And then as Clark, he's outside with her. It starts raining. They're by a fountain. And his eyeglasses are getting wet. His hair is starting to get wet and slicked back. Mm-hmm. So he's looking more and more like Superman.
But he pulls a ring out of his pocket and he asks her to marry him.
And then she says, who's asking? And she takes his glasses off.
And she says, Clark or Superman.
And then it fades to black.
And that was where that's where they cut the season.
I'm really glad that we watched you before season 3, because that's how season 3 starts.
Yes.
And we would have been like, what the heck is going on here? So he goes, how long have you known? Now, he also was trying to tell her the whole episode and they kept getting interrupted.
Yes.
But she realizes that it's him. The glasses fooled her, I guess, for 2 years. And she says no.
She says no, yeah. And then she spends the whole episode angry that he had never told her before.
But this is where people who are doing this show, this is their point, that it's about how the people would feel in these situations. Like, they wanted to flesh them out like real people. Yeah. And if you had somebody, let's say even you were seeing somebody and I'm dating you. And you don't tell me that you have a government, like you work for the government, for the FBI, let's say. Even if you had said, hey, I work for the government, but I can't really talk about my job. Okay. But if you wanted me to marry you and I have no idea what the rest of your life is like, that is a huge thing, right?
He was like, I wanted to tell you a lot, but I wanted to ask you to marry me first because I wanted to make sure you wanted to marry Clark and not Superman.
Which is so sweet.
And she's like, well, now we'll never know. Yeah. And he's like, Teri, easy.
But what I did like is that you can see their witty banter. And it's not that she doesn't like him, it's that she's hurt. A lot of times with rom-coms, the people are just very dislikable. And these two aren't. They're just having a difference of opinion. Like, was he right to protect her or should he have told her?
They're doing back and forth.
We have this great piece where his parents get involved. And they're traveling up from Kansas.
Yes.
And they're visiting with them. And we hear the story of their courtship from Jonathan's perspective and then Martha's perspective.
Yeah, Jonathan is they're basically trying to get the two of them together again. So Jonathan's talking to Clark and Martha's talking to Lois.
And Jonathan's like, I had to chase your mom a bit and ask her a couple times to marry me. And Martha's like, she basically says, I asked him for time because I wasn't sure if we were very young. Yeah. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to settle down yet. Yeah. And
he asked me 4 times, and you're like, whoa. Jonathan said twice.
Jonathan said twice, and Martha admits, no, it was 4 times before she said yes. So basically, we close out that episode with, Superman saving the day, etc. But Lois and Clark are still kind of up in the air. Yeah. Later in the season, she proposes to him, and he says yes, because now she feels ready, and she wants him to know that she loves him. and then she gets a bad haircut and the ratings go down.
No, well, what happens, and this kind of gets to the theory, some of the people who don't subscribe to the fact that this fell into the moonlighting curse point to the fact that even throughout season 3, while they're together, they still goes well.
Okay.
It's not until season 4 when they have the wedding.
Yeah.
And they decide as writers to have Lois switched out and a clone replace her for the wedding. And then they find out, and so come to find out they didn't get married, and the actual series drops dramatically after that.
So this is the thing, too. Like, let's talk about moonlighting for a second, because what happened with moonlighting is that they had a very similar thing. They got married for like 4 days and something happened, and then they got divorced, or they found out she was still married to her previous husband. Like, they did a very similar thing that basically they got them together and then tried to not have them be together.
Yeah.
You know? And I will say, I know you don't love Friends, but there are a couple shows like Friends where they had two characters get together and then they broke them up quickly and replaced it with other characters having relationships so that the same thing wouldn't happen.
Well, Friends was one of the shows listed under that moonlighting curse as well as Castle.
Oh, well, Castle's a whole other
kettle of fish. I mean, that's a whole other kettle of fish because the two stars didn't get along.
They did not
but also,
get along.
Things changed once they got together.
Yeah, that's true.
Because a lot of it was based off the banter.
Yeah, that's true.
And this show was like that, and that's why I want to say to lead the reception, because one of the critics actually stated about Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman, that it was moonlighting with Superman.
I don't hate it. I mean, I'll take it. The other thing with that, too, is that I think that Hollywood has been very notorious for having problems writing happily married couples. That if you look at sitcoms, they have married couples who are always fighting and bickering because that creates comedy, right? Or it creates drama, either way. And I know that they've talked about this with How I Met Your Mother, that they have Marshall and Lily are two characters, and they have them. They were going to keep them apart for a while, and then they were like, no, we want to show a couple who starts off engaged, gets married, and has a good relationship, and the comedy comes out of them being a team, and other people like are against them as a team, right? And or bicker with them as a as like but they're almost always a team together, not just arguing with each other.
But even in How I Met Your Mother, for about a season, they split them up.
They and it did not go well.
And in Castle, after they were married, they spend a season where she's pretending to have divorced him.
Oh, that's right. She's
and they
in, like,
separate
the
them as well.
Yeah, she's like...
And it didn't go well.
No.
Nobody liked it.
No. So how did it do in the ratings?
So ratings, it went well. The first 3 seasons, it was cranking in like 18 million viewers.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For all 3 first seasons. And then the 4th season dropped to like 6 million.
So
which is a tremendous drop.
That's a huge drop. Would that be in like the top 10 of
No, it was 20? In like the 30s, which is still good.
Yeah.
And then when it drops in season 4, it drops to like 101.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right? And
when we're talking about the top 30, not for its night, but like for the
overall
week.
Ratings.
Yeah, for the week. So it probably would have been on ABC, and it probably would have come in maybe 2nd or 3rd every night.
So on Rotten Tomatoes, they give a critic score of 86 for Lois and Clark.
Okay.
And an audience score of 92. That's really good because both are high.
Yeah, that's really good.
And so it was received well. Like I said, it had over 18 million viewers for most of its seasons, 3 out of the 4 seasons. And it was originally on ABC, as you said, and then pulled into syndication on TNT. From 97 to 2003, it ran on TNT, which is probably why you saw a lot of it in reruns. Interestingly enough, also in later syndication or rebroadcast, it was broadcast in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, and a number of other countries where it's titled just The New Adventures of Superman.
Oh, interesting.
Not Lois and Clark, because the title of Lois and Clark originally was formed over a pun of Lewis and Clark, and they didn't think non-American viewers would get the pun.
Well, or they wouldn't like the colonialism.
Right, so they just went with The New Adventures of Superman.
Yeah.
Also, within the reception here, in 4 seasons, Lois and Clark was nominated for 5 Emmys.
Oh, okay. For acting or for special effects?
Different things. Sound, sound mixing, special effects. So it really depended. But there was achievement in main title theme, achievement in directing a drama, outstanding sound mixing, again, costuming.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And mixing for drama series, sound mixing a few times.
Okay.
Also, Best Actress in a Drama, Teri Hatcher for Viewers' Choice Awards. Right? And the Directors Guild of America nominated it as well for directing. And then they did also win a Saturn Award for Best Genre Television Series.
And that's the, we've talked about Saturn before because that does sci-fi awards.
Sci-fi, yep.
Yeah. So are there any other thoughts that you have about the show before we get to our reaction? Anything else you want to...
Not really. I think, like I said, I think it was overall well received. I liked it. Does it ruin my childhood? It does not. I enjoyed watching it again. We actually watched a few other episodes that we didn't need for this podcast once we started watching it.
Yeah, I have to say, I was just really pleasantly surprised because my memories of this show and X-Files are so tied up to the people that I was friends with at the time that it was more, like we said, it was like, we did do like viewing parties, right? And so it's so tied up more with my memories of them that I was just like, but was that a good show? Or was it a thing where it was like among a certain group of people who were kind of nerdy and the guys probably like comic books and the girls probably like rom-coms? Like, was it just like a flash in the pan kind of thing that like we liked because, that kind of thing? And there's a lot that you look back on, especially your early teenage years when you're like 13, 14, that now you're like, oh, that's horrible. Like, if I read the Babysitter Club books that I read when I was 12.
Fell under that.
No, it didn't. Look, there's some stuff that's dated. The color palette drove me bananas.
And it's continued to try to be a thing, right? Smallville came out after this. And was again talking to Clark Kent before he even becomes Superman. Right. And that went a lot of seasons. I want to say like 11.
I was going to say, I think it is 11.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they did the Man of Steel movie in the 2000s.
With Amy Adams.
Amy Adams and Henry Cavill, right? And then he was throughout the Justice League, a number of other things. They played the same characters. Just recently, they've done Superman and Lois. Which is now in its third or fourth season.
That's a cartoon,
Nope,
right?
That's a live action. And it's about Superman and Lois with their kids as teenagers.
Oh, okay.
In Smallville.
Where is that
It was on CW. It's on HBO Max now. And I think they just did their fourth and final season or third and final season. That actually incorporated, as I mentioned before, there was also a Supergirl show on the CW that went a number of seasons. And they took the actor who played Superman in that and gave him this show with Lois Lane but it was him and Lois with older kids, basically.
Which would be basically half alien.
They were, yeah. They have powers.
Yeah. So a lot of superhero things are like that because there's so much history and lore. It's almost like with a soap opera where it's just like the same character keeps changing different iterations.
But I'd still rather watch this than some of those other ones.
I would too. And 100%, I will say this. I enjoyed the other episodes we watched. I would like to go back and watch all of season 2 and season 3 and probably still not season 4.
Yes.
But seasons 1, 2, and 3 to watch them fall in love and have that chemistry and enjoy the episodic nature of things, which sometimes now you have to pay so much attention because something happens in episode 2 of a show and it's brought up again in the second season, episode 4.
Because it is
long form storytelling, which I normally enjoy, but other times I'm like, I just want my brain to relax a little bit. So yeah, there's some stuff that's outdated, the color palette, the clothes, but that also hits the nostalgic piece of it, right?
Yeah.
That you feel like you're back in the 90s when people cared about things like newspapers.
So you heard what the critics had to say. Where do you rank Lois and Clark?
Yeah, I'm going to give this a solid 9. I mean, it's not my super, super favorite, but I really liked it. I mean, it's like, it's an A
Yep.
It's not A+ for me. It's not like my top 10 shows of all time.
Yeah.
But I gave the movie an 8, and that was pushing it a bit. I wish we did A through F, like a report card, because I think that's easier. I feel like I gave the movie like a B+. This is like an A-. It's better than the movie. I do like Christopher Reeves in the movie, and Margot Kidder's okay. Gene Hackman was fun. But the chemistry between these two is captivating. I do, especially the second season. I really like the chemistry between Perry and Jimmy as like buddy, friend, mentor relationship that they've got going on. They're super fun as well. I like Martha and Jonathan in this. I like the little things, like we didn't mention like small details, like she wants Chinese food and he flies to China.
Yeah.
He brings her back like real dim sum. And there's little things like that that are just really cute. They have a nice balance of romance, adventure, and humor.
Yes.
Which for me is always a win. So yeah, I'm going to give it a 9.
So I'm also going to give it a 9.
You're a copycat.
It really, I really had, it has a lot of good to it. I didn't feel like it took anything away from ruining my childhood. In fact, I enjoyed watching it again. A lot of memories kind of came back up, but also it's just, the stories are pretty good, right?
Yeah.
They're family friendly. I would have no problems letting kids watch this show. There's certain things that might go over their head a little bit. Mm-hmm. Some of the kind of innuendo jokes, but they're not so graphic in your face that it would be inappropriate for the kid.
It's very wholesome, and even the piece with Kat where she's throwing herself at him, you get that that's not appropriate.
Exactly.
Like it's uncomfortable, and
you get
it's there
he's
to,
not
like,
interested,
and Lois is jealous.
Yeah,
but it's a super wholesome, cute show.
It is, yeah, and I mean the acting, as you mentioned, is great, right? Dean Cain's a cool cat. Mm-hmm. I like him. Like I said, he's not my favorite Superman, but he's up there. I thought his Superman was good. His Clark Kent was, I think, probably one of the better best Clark Kents I've seen.
Yeah.
And Teri Hatcher will always be my Lois Lane. Quite possibly tonight in my dreams.
I don't like that. The thing about Superman is that because he is supposed to be, like we talked about last week, he's supposed to be like a Boy Scout. That sometimes they cast people who are a little more bland. Henry Cavill is kind of bland to me. I like Amy Adams. I don't like her as Lois Lane. I don't think they had much chemistry in that movie.
They also tried to go dark with that whole universe.
Yeah,
dark works for Batman. Superman is not dark.
But they have here, like, Clark Kent is not perfect.
Right.
He sometimes does flirt with other people or look at Kat maybe a little bit the wrong way. Not to the extent that she should shove her tongue down his throat.
Right.
But
without consent.
But he does argue with Lois. He should have told her before proposing. There are little things like that. Like, he's not perfect. He is a person. But he's trying his best to be a good person and to help the world. So...
Yeah. 9 capes out of 10.
9 capes out of 10, and we're same page for this and the snack.
Much better than the snack, though, which didn't make it. 2.5.
Oh, no. Listen, if you're in Michigan, enjoy that ice cream. I can't recommend the Perry's kind. I really can't.
Watch Lois and Clark. Maybe don't eat superhero ice cream while you do it.
Yeah, and we should have said we saw Lois and Clark on Max because HBO owns all the DC stuff.
All the Warner Brothers stuff, yeah.
And we might try to do a superhero cartoon coming up, but I think if we're going to go every other week, we're probably going to hit Halloween before then.
True.
So, what is Steve willing to watch?
Teri Hatcher. Teri Hatcher is what Steve is willing to watch.
Then we'll watch Desperate Housewives.
Teri Hatcher, if you're out there, Steve is open for sponsorship.
I don't like this whole thing going on right now. I know that you don't want to watch Desperate Housewives.
I do not.
The first season of Desperate Housewives is almost perfect, and then they ruin the ending of the mystery, and it makes me angry every time I think about it. Anyway, let me just ask you, Steve, what would you like to watch for Halloween? Last year, we went very young child Halloween. We did Scooby-Doo and we did Monster Squad.
Hocus Pocus as well.
And we did Hocus Pocus. So we did really 3 things that were very
young
oriented. So this time I'm thinking like maybe a slasher film or a scary movie like 80s, 90s.
Poltergeist.
Okay. That's a good choice. Yeah. I
haven't seen Poltergeist in easily 30 years.
And I have a very interesting memory about Poltergeist that we can talk about. We're also going to try to supplement here and there, especially for holidays, with maybe some extra content. So the plan right now is that I might do another episode with my brother, guest hosting with me while Steve is busy. And if that happens, we're going to be watching Gremlins.
Are you trying to cut me out?
Yeah.
It better not come out. It doesn't come out of my royalties.
We don't have royalties.
Oh, okay.
We don't have. Listen, this is just us doing this for fun at this point. We sort of, yeah. So I'm not pushing you out completely yet. Tim is up for co-hosting, and he wanted to watch Gremlins, and that is a scary movie, but one kind of aimed at teens, I think, a little bit.
No, that sounds great, and it'd be great to get Tim back on. He was with us for our 50th anniversary episode.
Yeah, but he hasn't done like a full episode with us, like
or just with you, which will be nice.
Or just with me. Yeah.
So if you do that with him or with your mom, that's fine. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, and you know what, listeners, you'll just miss me even more and be happy when you hear me.
That's probably true. So overall, not a bad day for Superman.
Good day.
Hopefully, there were a lot of superhero cartoons in the 80s and 90s, and we've got a cartoon up on deck after our Halloween stuff. So we'll talk about that next time. And thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.